Ben Joseph Stewart, what a time to be alive, dude.
I know, man. Just went through several successive tidal waves of emotion.
For real.
Yeah, for months now.
It's almost like it's building and building and building. I think for me, for me and my family, it started, you know, 5 years ago, 4 years ago, and it just builds like just this Terrence McKenna idea of things are just going to get weirder and weirder, and it's going to get so weird, we're just going to have to talk about it. So here we are.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a point where you can't not talk about it anymore. In that clip that you're talking about, he says this is what you would expect to happen for a species that is going I say like type 1 civilization. Um but he says interplanetary and interdimensional. And I think that too, that might be specific, but that might just basically mean like before there's a quantum leap in a species' ability to do anything, um, shit has to go into a catabolic process, And this is what it would feel like. Half the country can't even agree on what's a good scenario and what's a bad scenario. And I think that also precedes people asking the deeper questions. And you don't really get to the deeper substance unless you ask the deeper questions.
Right.
So I think that's what we're experiencing on a more like meta level. But if you don't allow yourself to go meta in the mind and just with your worldview, then you're probably just going to be pointing out the shit that seems to be like it's crumbling, and then
Hmm.
we ignore the stuff that's not crumbling. The fact
Yes.
that like a lot of people are saying like everything is on the line, and when I look out on the street, I'm like gas prices look normal, not super normal, but grocery prices, they're higher than they were 4 years ago, and housing prices way up. And yeah, but is that any single politician? Is that any single cabinet? Is that the great experiment of the United States and free market capitalism? Is it neoliberalism? Is it just a wash of psychosis because game theory economics drives them to be the most successful? Because to do the things you need to do to be successful in this system and sleep at night with a clear conscience, you almost need to dissociate from the greater cost of it all. So I think what we're seeing are telltale signs, you could say, of an empire crumbling, but I would say of like something new being birthed.
I think both. I think both. I think the society crumbling. This grand experiment may culminate here sooner than later in changing into something different. And whether that's civil unrest, or a new form of government, I don't know. But the but this is, I'm trying to stay away from cliches because it's so easy to get into them, but like darkest before the dawn, the dark night of the soul moment, maybe this is now. And I think it's tough because just about every election is the most important election in the history of elections. I certainly felt that with Obama. um the course correction from Trump back to Biden, this like return to normalcy felt, or at least was positioned as the most important. And then here we are again. This is the most important, but it's harder and harder to stay even keeled. And this is obviously part of what you're talking about with your film that I definitely want to dive into. And it's near and dear to my heart because I have been basically a student of RFK Jr. for many years and followed his career and his life fairly closely. But it's harder to stay in the middle. There's this oscillation between extreme left and extreme right. And this is obviously something that you get into in the film. But I believe very strongly that this is going to give way for something different, a change. Maybe it's from 3D to 4D consciousness. Maybe maybe we're finally going to get the holographic alien invasion that shifts everyone's perspective to to a new way of being. Maybe we're going to get actual aliens coming out of the mountains and of Mount Shasta, which galvanizes us as a culture on the planet. I don't know, and I, but we do have to stay based. We do have to stay grounded and talk about some of this stuff.
Yeah, I think talking helps, and also viscerally experiencing the cost of collective decisions before us is, you think of in plant medicine, talking can actually like throw you off trying to deal with this inner explosion of experience and novelty. Oftentimes, a truly novel inner experience is indistinguishable between the spectrum of pain and pleasure. We don't know whether we like it. It's truly novel. And so the easiest thing to do, as in medicine, is if your mind catches on to anything like this idea, how bad could it get? Is this going there? How much more intense could this be? Then you start kind of riding that wave, and your mind starts to manifest itself through your body in a chemical structure. And then you could also do it the other way, where you surrender to it and you're like, whoa, how amazing could this get? And you can go on that ride. And I think that there's a couple things I think that's happening here. I think this is actually very natural, but we as a species are just like that person having that novel experience inside. And I think Trump is really just the smallest part of it. It's a focal scapegoating mechanism that humans have, where there's collective shadow grows. That tension can't resolve itself unless it emerges and shows itself somehow. It's like a word that just wants to be said. And once it does that, the most obvious mechanism, all the way back to bread and circuses, even into tribal life before chiefdoms and kingdoms, you have this scapegoating mechanism, which is, if the inner responsibility, if we are all spiritually connected, the inner responsibility of saying, I'm responsible for what's happening out in the world, even if I'm not the physical person who put this organization in place. If I don't want to be accountable for all of it, or if there's some of it I don't want to feel, then I externalize it and give something exterior to blame.
Hmm.
And that's part of what conspiracy did for me back in 2007. It was this relief, like, oh, I thought I was just kind of psychologically fucked up. I
Yeah.
didn't think I could have a normal relationship. I didn't think I knew how to work this economic thing, and I was placing it all on me and not letting anybody else have it. I thought everyone else was normal and I was odd. And then all
Hmm.
of a sudden, conspiracy comes along and is like, oh, the world is kind of fucked up. It's not what I thought it was. It's not a bunch of adults that have things figured out. And that gave me a little bit of like, oh, I don't have to hold it all. But then I think even that has oscillations where, like, at some point you need to stop blaming exterior circumstances or this external look of things out there for how you're feeling on the inside. Case in point, Trump's in office. Let's say 50% of the people are ecstatic and 50% of the people have gone into this fear mode, with a laundry list of what could happen. Same exact experience. Well, same exact external look of things, and people are having radically different experiences to that. So what I think that we are seeing now, and I would love to hop into the film because that really highlights the last 3 months, but what I would like to see more of are well-spoken people on both the left and the right get more to the heart of what's happening and not blame exterior looks of things more.
Hmm.
I think Marianne Williamson did a really good job when she said, this is the left's fault, and I can point to exactly who it is. It's these unelected, self-appointed leaders within the DNC that wouldn't let real viable voices like RFK Jr., Marianne Williamson. There was others, but those voices in particular, and I've met both of those individuals. Like, there is something about them that's just like, okay, you are a politician, you speak like a politician, but I believe the stuff that's coming out of your mouth, even if I don't agree. I believe it. That was like me and Ron Paul back in 2008. Was like, wait a minute, I actually believe this person.
Yeah.
Like, even if I don't agree, I feel their soul, I feel their sincerity in the words that they speak. That was very foreign to me. And that opened up a realm of possibility. It opened up two things: this realm of possibility, like, holy shit, there are real people out there that really want to steer things in a good and non-corrupt way. They want to actually give power and choice and voting power, not just in primaries, but voting power to the people. It opened up that possibility. And then it opened up when I saw what they did with Ron Paul on the mainstream media, where there would be, who was it? Obama, was it McCain back then? And then Ron Paul, they would show their little pictures, and they would either use, that empty avatar, which is like a little cartoonish, like a gray person against a white background. They would do that for Ron Paul. And one time they added, it wasn't Andrew Yang, but it was somebody Asian running. And I'm like, wait a minute, that can't be a mistake.
Can't. Yeah.
And so when I started seeing that, I'm like, oh, the dirty tricks, as I always knew, they run deep through every institution. So much is captured. So I think that's what we're dealing with today, and that's why I made the film about RFK. It's not because I really didn't want to make a film about a presidential candidate in an election year. I didn't want to make a fluff piece to try and get RFK elected. And so when I set off making this film with Aubrey, I didn't know how I was going to end it in a way that I truly appreciated. But when RFK suspended his campaign, endorsed Trump, and Aubrey Marcus called me and he's like, well, what do you think we do with the film now? Do we finish the film? And I was like, give me a shot to try and finish it. And I was thinking inside, I'm going to finish it the way I would finish this film. If you've seen any of my films in the past, it's about a twist of emotion, conspiracy at the beginning, and like human potential at the end. This way of bringing people, oscillating them through the poles within them, the depth of like scary shit all the way up to the most empowering things in one film. And I was like, I'm going to do that with this film. And towards the end, he was like, I don't know if I want to post anything. I think I'm out of politics. And I sent him what I had so far. And he was like, okay, this is going down. So like, we're going to launch this thing the day after the election, when people are able to grasp what happened, because this was not a film to try and change the outcome of the election, but it really was pointing at how many people want there to be more than two parties.
Yeah.
Turns out well over 100 million. They're just not organized. And
Right.
that's the thing about the two parties. And I say it at the beginning of the film. By the way, for the audience, the film is called Land of the Free. I'm sure you can drop a link in there as well. But you just go to my Ben Joseph Stewart Instagram. The link is in my bio. And just type in Land of the Free on YouTube and you'll find the film. And I start the film with this concept of, I show Trump and Harris, and it's during one of the debates, and I just show a little snippet of each of them, and then I just say the word duopoly, a singular political body appearing as two distinct choices. And that is the setup for the entire film. Like, are we really dealing with two options here, or are we dealing with the same machine? We're just bitching about who's going to drive this Titanic. But the destination is the same. Who gets to be behind the wheel as we hit the iceberg? So to me, that's the point of the film, is we need to look more deeply, not just at the front of the face of the person that is spoon-fed and handed to us, but who funds them? Where are the incentive structures? How has the direction not changed in America, no matter whether a Democrat or a Republican has been in office over the past several decades? And that's when you start seeing the pattern at play here. So that's what I was trying to portray. And just to kind of like give the audience a little bit of an idea of what I was going for, was Act 1 is really setting up that machine. And then Act 2 is really setting up RFK's pursuit to the White House and everything he experienced. He experienced pushback from Trump. I almost included a couple of videos where Trump was calling him a far left person that's even far left of Joe. He's just sharper and more intelligent, which is a bad thing. But it was the DNC that had this clear choice pack that was like, sue RFK in every single state, sue to get him off the ballot, find technicalities, doesn't matter what, get him off the ballot in all 50 states. And RFK won every one but the New York one. And then all of a sudden, when he suspends his campaign, they start suing him to stay on the ballots because he said, I'm going to remove my name on the swing states. And they're like, actually, no, you're not. We're going to sue you to keep you on the ballots. So when you see that and you're the left and you're Marianne Williamson or Daniel Pinchback and even people that I highly disagree with, but I agree with them on their collective understanding of why the left lost. It was, you guys canceled democracy this year. You didn't primary Kamala in there. You didn't let the people speak at all. You're the Democratic Party and you canceled democracy. And so that was really act two right there. But then when RFK steps out, it's no longer a film about RFK anymore. It's about the individuals. And the whole thing, the real champion the entire time was the idea that point at the system for what it truly is and want to bring change. I think RFK wanted to bring change through the Democratic Party. And I think if the Democratic Party chose to stay with democracy, they would have chosen RFK or Marianne Williamson. They would have found somebody that was better suited, more sincere, and would have come across more sincere to even the people on the right. And there would have been a better challenge to Donald Trump for those who didn't want Trump in office. And then for those who do want Trump in office, like, congratulations. What you did was you harvested people like Vivek, Tulsi, RFK. I think they almost got Ron Paul, or they did get Ron Paul by the end. And I was like, okay, so you're trying to show, listen, it's not all about Trump. There are more people that we're trying to get in here. But the film itself was really showing, aside from all of what just happened, there's more independent voters than there are Republican voters or Democratic voters by heads and shoulders. The only difference is they don't have the uniting and organizing idea behind them. So that was the point of this film. We need to talk about this idea.
Yeah, it's interesting to me in the fact that some of the most authentic, thoughtful people are the least organized. you know,
Mm-hmm.
you see this in the um, sort of hippie culture. You see this in um, wellness, in performance optimization. People with big hearts who
Mm-hmm.
speak well, who are very thoughtful, who want to raise people up, um, they tend to not have a level of laser focus or a razor's edge that is what it takes to get through a complicated system and to fight against, you know, special interests and tyranny. And it's kind of always been this way. Or at least in my interpretation, it's always been this way. Marianne Williamson is an excellent example. She's an extremely thoughtful person. Everything that she says is just like, oh my gosh, she means that. That's an interesting idea. And maybe the people that are with her or work with her and support her in a way are really thoughtful people and are okay being even minded and even handed about things. And that doesn't really prove so far to work to propel a candidate forward.
No, no. I mean, it's a zero-sum game in politics. You use the tactics that provide you short-term benefit, even though they look really immature on the back end. And that's why it seems like we're devolving into idiocracy, is because these tactics work. If you are on the right or if you are on the left and you really believe if your party does not get into the office, bad things happen for not just you and your pocketbook, but for the country, then you'll be open to some emergency ideas. And I think this is actually it. There's two different governments. Most people don't realize this. There's a government during peacetime and there's a government during emergencies. And they operate wildly differently between the two. And lately, we don't really know which one we're in, because some people can get down to a semblance of feeling like, oh, well, at least around me, I'm in a state of peace. Whereas there's always some kind of listed state of emergency going on that's causing for rule changes to be exploited. And so that's the interesting thing, is it works with consciousness, and all politics do. Actually, Kurt Doolittle says that the left and the right are actually um, institutionally embodied echoes of the feminine and the masculine neurology that goes back, maybe pre-mammalian. And what that means is that the feminine uses coercion in or as a dark trait of in order to get what they need, and as a positive trait, nurture and true unconditional love. Whereas the more conservative, if you will, masculine consciousness, it, its darker trait is, oh, well, I'll just fight you. I'll use violence to get what I want. And the more the lighter trait is, I will protect you against people that you can't protect yourself. I am, if I'm stronger, I will be the one to protect you.
Hmm.
And that these neurologies, they embody themselves in institutions because it's the one rooted factor in all of humans that's a through line. So it turns into our political system the way it is. But as I said, there's two forms of governance, in government and in the human being. That's our consciousness during states of peace, when we can explore and play, we're fed, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is taken care of. That's when you grow, you learn, you develop, you play, you try new things, you take a little risk. You don't take any risk. You don't play. You don't grow in a state of emergency. And so that's, I think, what we're actually seeing embodied in our, in all of our civil discourse, and in the nation, and in nation states at large, is there's an emergency happening at the top level that most people don't get to see. We get the watered down version of the media message and narratives around it. But it's almost as if there's something attacking the brain of a human, and the rest of the body doesn't realize it. It
Hmm.
doesn't know how to mount a proper defense, because the brain is actually sending false messages to the rest of the body. So I think that takes care of that, or that is at least a very oversimplified model that explains why we have the systems of governance that we do, but what mechanism is switched on and stuck in the on position. And that's the emergency switch. That's why people who relatively feel like, why do we have so much war? Why the hell is inflation out of control? Like, why do these things have to be such bad problems? Because the people at the top are in shadow wars with other nation states, and we don't really feel the effects of it, except for, why does it, why is the economy, and, like, why is the military industrial complex seriously need next to $1 trillion every single year?
Hmm.
That's where I think the wonkiness in our system is. So, when just alluding to what you were saying earlier about, does this kind of fourth turning vibe, does it insinuate that there is a radically new system on the other side of whatever this chaos is? I think it is. And what I actually am hopeful about it. And that's not because of the right or the left. It's actually because of humans. I know that after states of chaos, we do come back to semblance. And that's when we can really start to not just integrate what we just learned by trial of fire, but also, I think Marianne Williamson is right. There are a lot of people who, it's not because of Trump per se, it's because of people's perspective of Trump, that him getting into office represents a collective wounding and a trauma. All that stuff needs to be addressed if we wish to get to the next evolution of governance. And if we wish to truly, as a species, have the incentive structures towards our enlightenment and towards our higher potential, then really what needs to happen is we need the hard truth. We need transparency as to why the emergency switch is stuck in the on position. And we don't have transparency like that, in the same way that an adult is not going to tell their little child exactly what mom and dad do in the bedroom and lock the door, or what happened to that kid in the car once, or that kid on the bike once the car hit him. You know what I mean? Like, there's certain truths we don't want to share. But as that child gets older, you're actually harming that child by not allowing the child to see the truth, by protecting them from the truth. I think we're at that precipice now. And this is a good thing. If we can put it into our mental constellation that this, although hard, like ayahuasca, like, difficult experiences, rites of passage, although hard, it's necessary. And then when we can adopt, are you a dad?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So like, as with a child, when you can see that, like, okay, there's a different cry. There's a cry when you're truly, you can't do it. You're in a state of fear and your body's not letting you do. And I'm asking, like, take that leap or climb that thing. And then there's the, you're whining. It's kind of a fake cry. No, you do know how to do this. And I can't save you, because I'm going to reinforce that neural pathway that I'll always get saved by somebody else. We're
Yeah,
at that point in history.
yeah,
Nobody's coming to fucking save us but ourselves.
right,
And once we realize there is no other, we keep othering other people, but deep down inside, we know, all of us knows, there is no other. It starts with us. It starts at home. It starts in the little behaviors that build to bigger behaviors. It starts local. It bleeds global. Until we swallow that pill, nothing's going to change. And I will say this. I'll take back what I just said. Unless we swallow that bitter pill, nothing's going to change unless a catastrophe happens and we're
right,
forced to swallow the pill.
right, right. And I worry a bit about that. I worry a little bit about whether or not we can swallow that pill and be brave and lean into the change and speak our minds and stand up and have conversations like this at higher and higher and higher levels before World War III, or before, Project Bluebeam, or before, solar flares. Because what else are we doing? Right? What else are we doing as humanity other than changing? It's the two things we can count on are change and death. Those are the only two. Those are the only two. And if you shy away from it, and if you stick your head in the sand and you stay in that fight or flight sort of mentality every single day, all day, you go home and you stay in it, you wake up with it, you go to sleep with it, then it's gonna be way more challenging. Um, what I've noticed, and I know you have noticed as well, is some of these institutions that prop up this dualistic scenario, like the mainstream media, um, like, um, you know, access to social media. I think we're noticing that kids are slowly understanding that maybe TikTok and social media aren't as good for them as possible. It's happening in my neighborhood with my kids and their friends. It's like they're noticing that, man, I feel really lousy if I spend all afternoon when I get home from school, on social media. That's shifting. The soundbite clickbait stuff is making its way for long form podcasts. What's happening, with Joe Rogan at the forefront, having 3-hour conversations to really suss out and really explore ideas, alternatives, in a thoughtful way, in an authentic and genuine way. That's different. That's different than what your grandparents had and my grandparents had. Walter Cronkite reading them the news. You just took it at face value. Okay, Walter said it, so that's what it is, and I'll just believe it. I think that these institutions that are starting to change and shift a little bit, Zuckerberg growing his hair out and starting jujitsu, Elon taking over Twitter. These are subtle shifts in the way that, crypto. All of these things are sort of little breadcrumbs to allude to some sort of change that I think is happening. And for people, I think, for like you and I, who um, entertain a lot of the conspiracies that we do, because they are not theories, many of them are actual conspiracies, then I think that people are more situated to be able to look at both sides of things. You can look at both sides of the coin, and then you flip it on its side and you can see the rim around the side, and you're like, oh geez, I didn't even think of that. There's a third side of the coin. Man, well, that changes everything. For me, as a communication and journalism double major, my senior thesis was around the mission accomplished speech with Bush on the USS Lincoln, and this massive propaganda campaign that somehow we had won the war in Iraq, and he didn't say it, but it said mission accomplished over his head. And so in 2004, I was like, okay, well, not as everything is not what it seems to be, and that's okay. That's okay. That's something that each of us have to deal with and figure out how we integrate that into our lives. But what comes from that is an openness and a willingness to see things a little bit differently and to make your own personal autonomy and your own personal choice and sovereignty the primary act in your life. This like appeal to authority that again the golden generation and the boomers have always done, which is like, well, that's just the way it goes. We just have to go along with it. That's the news. That's it's shifting, and I have hope for your children and my children to be able to create and change even more with this greater awareness.
Yo, did you hear that Alex Jones was there's this video about him being the press secretary,
Yeah.
and then he goes on and because Candace Owens was saying it, and he was like, the whole video, it actually said that he accepted the position. I think that's a prank.
Yeah.
But I mean, when he took it seriously, he was like, listen, I would do it for a couple months. I think it'd be awesome if Candace did it for a couple months, if Joe Rogan did it for a couple months. And that's when I was like, yes. Not yes that I agree that that specifically should happen, but that is the telltale sign that something monumental is happening, and there is an opening in the consciousness. Now, a lot of people with those specific names would say that is the devolution and the idiocracy of our, of our near future, and other people would say it's a sign that the medium has changed. The medium really is the message, because these long form. Pippa Malmgren said this. The every single election cycle, there's a new technology that really amplifies the way that the candidates get their voices out,
Hmm.
and that's definitely podcast that they won this time around. Next time around, I don't know, maybe Discord, chat rooms, or it could be on Web3 or something like that. But I just find that to be really fascinating. And you mentioned that fateful moment that George Bush said when he landed on the Lincoln and said, "Mission accomplished, let's go home." Just a quick funny story about that. I had just enlisted in the Army. I was
Hmm.
17 when that happened, 18, I should say. And I was about to ship out. I might have been 19. Regardless, I was about to ship out to the Middle East. And right before going, I was going to get my anthrax shot. But right before that happened, I'd shaved my head. I was ready. I wasn't even one of those guys, but I was just like, fuck it. I'm just going to, when in Rome type of deal. And he lands on the Lincoln aircraft carrier, says, "Mission accomplished, let's go home." They canceled my orders. I didn't have to get the anthrax vaccine, which turned out to have like some long-term repercussions of them. And I didn't end up going to the Middle East. Instead, I got sent elsewhere, a much better place, where I bought a surfboard and I was surfing. And so that was just like, that was an interesting turn of events that didn't want me to go out there, because
Sure.
then when nobody ended up coming home, it's just like, wait, you said mission accomplished. Why isn't anyone returning from the Middle East? They didn't reinstate my canceled orders. They just skipped over my rotation and went to the next.
Oh,
So
wow.
that was God singing to me in that
Wow.
specific way. And then shortly after that, they were offering me 20 grand to stay in the military. And I was like, I'm going to take my chances with the music industry.
Yeah.
So,
What you said about idiocracy and just how ridiculous, and I actually posted a picture of Alex Jones for press secretary on my Instagram, because it's so ridiculous. It is so idiocracy-esque
mhm.
that perhaps that sort, Hulk Hogan ripping his shirt off at Trump rallies, which is like um just unfathomable. It's so crazy and ridiculous, and it's also so American that that it that perhaps that sort of trickster energy, fool card of the tarot, where it's like just a goofball activities leading to some sort of major breakthrough, major awareness, sort of, blissfully ignorant perhaps that is the path toward a shaking up of the snow globe where everything is just totally crazy and ridiculous, that maybe that's what it takes before um, um, changes can happen at an institutional level, at a way that our government is organized. You know, the I don't know. I just it's like maybe idiocracy is where it needs to go before it breaks through into something else.
Dude, I'm glad that you brought up the trickster energy because, you could say these things are like, the parties are dogmatic and they never change, they never evolve, but they're both changing rapidly, evolving rapidly. A lot of reason why people left the left is because they're like, I don't recognize the party, right? They either went independent or went to the Republican side. But it's the same thing with the right. And what I feel is that they too are along for the ride. We think they're the ones
Yeah.
steering the ship, and
Right.
for sure they have influence. They have influence, but you know who they have to appeal to? Their base. So they have to dress like their base, talk like their base. They have to talk about the topics that their base wants them to talk about. They are at the whim of the base. And it's also the same that, a lot of shit goes towards the billionaire class. I'm not saying they aren't without flaws, but so is the bottom 1%. They have their flaws. And the real thing that we're looking at here is with that trickster energy, out of that ridiculousness and absurdity, I think will evolve the reason why we had to see it go through that absurd arc. And most of us are not going to embody a higher frequency, to use woo woo terms. We're not going to embody a higher frequency because we're so comfortable with, oh, when I'm ready to take responsibility for my shit, I will. When I'm not ready, I won't. And there's kind of this no parent, conscience inside of us. You will when it's necessary, when it's needed.
Right.
We, in a sense, I heard this guy, shit, I wish I could remember his name. It's like Rez Giorgiani or something, like something Jordan Giorgiani. Reza might be his last name, but anyway, he was saying, like, I've always been an anarcho-capitalist through and through. No government. We govern ourselves, and we can contract with other peoples. And I think contract theory goes back to not Milton, but I forget who, but who proposed these theories that kind of like rose to today. Anarcho-capitalism is this idea. It's extreme libertarian, where nobody controls me. And I've always liked that as well. But he was like, listen, what if there is a major catastrophe and we need a centralized representative, but centralized sovereign to say, we need to hop into immediate action,
Hmm.
mobilize the military to, stop the zombie apocalypse or the alien invasion. Anarcho-capitalism can't account for that at scale. So there's like a lot of people, when they're stuck in these political ideologies, they're it's like dogma. They're arguing stuff that even deep down their soul is like, you don't believe that anymore. It's just a part, you know how to speak it so eloquently, and you love the feeling that you get when you can speak more eloquently than others around you. You're stuck. And so, what forces us into the next evolution, the higher vibe that we need to embody, both individually and collectively, what does that? It's not more sunshine and rainbows, at least historically. Bliss might be able to, but like, talk to anybody who's done a plant medicine ceremony or gone through a rite of passage. It was not the beautiful serotonin dump afterwards that really stuck it. It wasn't. It was the cortisol and the adrenaline and this fight or flight and this there is no solution, left, right, middle, there is no solution. It's a total transformation that has to happen from within. And I really do feel like people need to go through that animalistic primal growl, that, like, they need to hit that point where they're like, fuck it, I'm not waiting for anybody else to come save me. I realize it now. This transformation is worth dying for, not some external cause or war. This internal transformation, I'm dead anyway if I don't go through this. So go
Hmm.
through it, and it breaks you down to a cellular level, and then you build yourself back up, and then you have an embodied, gnosis of this is what transformation, transcendence, and transmutation is. I now individually and collectively know how to do this. So now we as a species can go to type 1 civilization where we're able to travel either interdimensionally or astrologically, or into the astral field, I should say. We can do that without polluting of the earth. We can harness the energy of the planet without the massive cost. That's, I think, what's around the corner. Technology is a brilliant thing, and in fact, like when everyone's championing Bitcoin, and some of them are still the purists and like, I don't like technology and these 5G towers. I don't either, right? But it's like it's a step towards a technological future, and nobody knows what that's supposed to mean. And everybody is hanging on to these old ideas that like, oh, that means there's more surveillance and surveillance equals bad. And it's just like, yeah, according to the old ideal that we've
Right.
been holding on to, for sure, I can see that as well. But I it's not that I think catastrophe is around the corner. It's, I think, that primal growl and that rock bottom and that fucking ayahuasca peak where we're like, where is this going? I think that's around the corner for humanity. And if you want to get biblical, maybe that is what the rapture is.
Hmm.
There's something that has to happen that we either go along for the ride with or we say yes to, and it transforms us. That's what I expect to happen in the next 6 years, maybe
Yeah.
30.
Yeah. Yeah. The always the hardest part of gleaning and applying the experience that you get in hour 7 of an ayahuasca ceremony or in hour 4 of a massive psilocybin dose, all that insight, all that information, those downloads, that wisdom, that this new realization where you feel like a different person, like, man, I can't unknow that now. I can't, I'm changed. The hardest part always is the integration afterward. How does this change my behavior? How does this change the way that I talk to my wife? How does this change the way that I make my money? How does this change the way that I eat or the way that I move? That's always the hardest part, is now making it practical.
Mm-hmm.
One of my spiritual teachers that I've been working, my preeminent spiritual teacher I've been working with since I was like 24, she says, okay, Sean, you got the light show. Cool. How is it useful to you? Okay, you're talking to spirit guides. You're astral projection. You're projecting in the astral plane in float tanks. All that's great, dude. How is it useful? How is it practical? How do you bring it down into the material world? Because you are material. You have this material. What are you going to do with it? And that's always the most challenging part, is integrating that stuff and thinking practically about, okay, well then now what do I want to build for myself? How do I want to shift? How does this, I start with the I, okay, I am changed, and then I integrate that into the we. How do we change? And then how do all, the I, we, all, downstream from my trip is like, okay, how does this affect the cosmos? How does this affect the universe? How can I shift the way that I behave in a way that creates this progress? And that's hopefully, for maybe 50% of the American population, maybe this sort of itchy despair, this feeling. And I've been talking about it on Instagram a bit, and I'm going to go spend this weekend with friends who are extremely liberal, who cried the next morning, who are really having a hard time with this. I'm going to go spend 2.5 days with them over the long weekend, and I just want to listen. I don't want to tell them anything. Obviously think of myself as balanced in the way that I see the situation playing out, but I want to learn. I want to hear what they're going through, because I think it's going to be useful for us to have that understanding. And then maybe that will lead a lot of people to this, like, okay, now I'm going to change. I'm having this experience. It's not fun. It's not roses and fractals. It's now something hard that I can move through to make some change. I don't know.
Mm. Like, I feel you on the being there for those who are taking this moment hard. I also think there's the biggest opportunity for transformation inside
Yeah.
those who have just felt like they have hit rock bottom. That's where transformation happens. I'm almost excited for that's why when I've seen the reaction of the left, not the TikTok shit, I'm talking about the thought leaders and their reactions. There's something sobering happening, and I'm almost more excited about what can happen on the left than I am for those on the right, because I think the right is drunk
Yeah.
on the success, and
Right.
that's not a diss. I very much so resonate with many of the people on the right and on the left, and in fact, my favorite interviewer is actually Ezra Klein, deeply on the left.
Right.
And it's not because of his ideas, it's because of his voice. It's it's because of how his mind works. It's how he's able to hold an interview that sounds so perfect with every person that it almost sounds like they're reading off a script. um, he's very thoughtful, and I like listening to him. Do I agree with everything? I don't have to, like when I used to watch conspiracy videos all the time, I didn't agree with everything, but there was something happening where it was just like, oh, that's interesting. It feeds you in a different way when you're willing to just see it for what it is and not put it on a pedestal or throw it in the trash
Yeah.
immediately. So what I've been trying to do is really step deeper inside the mind and the feeling state of the left, and I had to do that with the right um, as well lately, because I actually don't consider myself on the left or on the right in policy terms. It's actually like a mix between the two. I probably am more on the there's from liberal to conservative and then authoritarian down to libertarian. I would almost say I'm more left libertarian than anything. But I'm also open minded, and I don't stick with any ideas for very long. So what
Uh-huh.
I've been doing is, instead of listening to the right, which alternative media on the right annoys me more than it does on the left. Even with the destinies and how he's always frustrated. Like, there is something where it's just like, oh, but I feel all of their sincerity, but I really love the people on the left that I'm hearing that can still keep an even keel about what they're saying, even if I don't like their ideas. And that's what's allowed me to step back and see that what's happening by and large to the left and the right is government is steering the people rather than people steering the government, right? We say
Right.
that this is of, by, and for the people, and that we are in a government by the consent of the governed. Well, that's not a problem to a sociopath or a psychopath who wants to take over the system. All they have to think is, okay, so how do we, like I've met a lot of rich people that they don't hear no when you tell them no. All they hear is not yet. So they
Yeah.
switch and they pivot. And that's kind of what I've been feeling is when you say the consent of the governed, they're just like, okay, how do I manufacture consent?
Right.
And there's many ways you do that. You make a worldview, you simulate an environment, you put them in it. Most people, they stare at this more than they look at their lovers' faces.
Hmm.
So you can simulate an environment by all your friends telling you what they got from this and then what you got from this. And when that simulated environment, which we know with epigenetics, environment changes you at not just a chemical level, but it can do so on a genetic level, or it can express itself differently. So we're in a simulated environment, and the constellation of values and boogeymen on the right is different than on the left, but they're mirrored in such a way, in such an intelligent way, that the hot button items that will never go away, that they're always going to argue on, are all we are allowed to focus on
Right.
because we're always staring at this thing.
Right.
So truly, the left is not idiotic. The right is not idiotic. They are hijacked by a very sophisticated machine that wasn't even invented in the 20th century. This goes back to the dawn of tribalism. Putting on a mask, dancing around a fire. People may, like this may be after a water fast, or maybe they did take some hallucinogen or something like that. Suggestibility, tell your story, implant the narrative, give them a fully immersive experience. That's where we're going with the metaverse, right?
Right.
There's going to be transdermal MDMA ketamine patches that you can put on. You put on this haptic suit, and every sense is going to be fed by the simulated environment, and we're going to choose to do it. And we wonder how we got here,
Right.
and I think that's because we are psychonauts. We are actually more interested in what's new and novel
Mm,
than Maslow's hierarchy of base needs, which is safety. And
yeah.
I really do think we are into getting weird and kinky and risking some shit more so than we just want to survive.
I agree. I totally agree with that. I've never really thought about it like that, but you're right. And I think that the reason that is the case is because we are a consciousness in a body. We're not a body with consciousness.
Right.
We are a consciousness first. And so, of course, we're going to love to space out. Of course, we're going to love Netflix. Of course, we're going to love, eating fermented fruit and being weird. Like, of course. Yeah, that makes sense. That I've never thought about it like that, but you're totally right. And so the sort of corporeal needs of the body tend to take second fiddle for novelty, for experience, for getting all riled up and feeling away.
I was thinking about this morning, getting back to the film that I just made. Really, what made me a filmmaker was taking mushrooms and watching Zeitgeist in
Yeah, I
20.
know that. Right, I know.
And so
What a great Genesis story.
I always knew that film is just like technology itself is an amplification of something within the human. It can amplify a little thing of your mind can get amplified big if that's the thing that you are actively not looking at. That's the vehicle to get you to look at what you're actively not looking at. And film is like a drug. And you were just mentioning Netflix, and like a lot of people are like, man, we're staring at these screens too much and we're sitting too much, and it's like I I get that, but it's because they're drugs. Movies like Netflix, we want to sit there and stuff our face, which fills our body full of drugs. We want to relax because that makes our body produce different drugs. And we want the film to curate an environment for us by which we can get adrenaline, then cortisol, some respite, some oxytocin. We can get some serotonin by the end, and it's tailor made, just like a song can do it in 4 minutes. A film can do it in 1 to 2 hours with a worldview attached to it. So it's giving you a drug. It's coordinating your
Yeah.
neurochemical and hormonal symphony and imprinting you with an idea. It can be brainwashing in many senses, the same as that tribesman, you know, giving the tribe drugs, putting on a mask, dancing in front of a fire, and saying, how grandfather Spider wove all of this into existence. Why? Because there's a value set. It may be a lie, right? But it's the same as the boy who cried wolf. No boy ever had to cry wolf for you to hear that and be like, oh, lying has a social impact. It imprints an idea upon you, and that can sprout into behavior. That's the power of these films that are symphonic signature drugs that are given to you with a worldview attached to it. And I'll just say this fantastic film I watched last night with Ethan Hawke. It's called Predestination. It came out in
Ah.
2014. Fucking mind blowing. And you got to watch it. At certain points, I was like, I think I know where it's going, and then I'm like, I don't know where it's. Okay, now I know where it's going, and it was just like, whoa! It's about time travel, and I won't give the whole thing away, but I noticed what it did, how it toyed with me. It is like, oh, you're going to go in this direction. Oh no, you're going in that direction. And there was this thing about it that was like, this is a living presence inside me. This is an intelligently crafted living presence inside me, in the same way that people say there's grandma's spirit inside the ayahuasca vine, and I feel
Hmm.
her when I take it. I was like, I feel the author tinkering and toying with these strings that they know very well are there, and why you pull them, at what time you pull them, in what order you pull them, and what drug you want to give last to make that nice feeling at the end. Go watch Predestination.
I
It's
will.
a good one, and you'll understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's the creation of these egregores that came out of nothing and then have this massive mental power, right? It's like we've created this thing, and now it's alive. Now we've cut it loose,
Hmm.
and that's what you're doing in film too, right? I mean, that, like quite literally, is creating these egregores. Some of them are scary, some of them are funny, some of them are insightful, and how people take them, wear them, integrate them in, welcome them in, sit with them, and then that changes them. I mean, you can't just like every film that you see changes you in a certain way. It presents something that really shifts the way that you be, not the way that you do or are, but the way that you be. And I have to ask this before we wrap. I know you're on a tight time. Do you think that RFK Jr. has a path to the White House now, being involved with the Trump with Trump?
Yeah. I'm gonna say something that I heard, and I'm not gonna say where I heard it, but he may run as a Republican in 2028, and so I think that's another testament to it's like a message to the left in a sense, like you should have given democracy a chance this time around and allowed for the best candidate to rise. And now, in this way, you shot yourself in the foot. Um, I do think he has a path to the White House. In the film, I laid it out, even how his path looked, even though people were like, there's absolutely no way. And I'm like, I know it's slim, but John Quincy Adams and Thomas Jefferson were both elected via a contingent election, which
Hmm.
means nobody got 270 electoral votes. It went to a contingent election where every state gets one vote. And whoever gets the most votes wins. And that's pretty interesting. And usually in contingent elections, they go to the third party because there's something inside the electoral college that's like, well, obviously the people are not happy with the traditional left or the right choice. Even though every president except for George Washington has been Republican or Democrat, and George Washington was like, I don't think there should be parties at all. That's very interesting when you get into political theory and you start looking at what parties actually are and who they're even designed to represent. They're not necessarily designed to represent the people or those who vote. Sometimes it's designed to represent the donor class. But back to your case or your question, um, I think RFK does have a path, and I don't know what might happen next election. I've heard some radical theories that there may not be another human election thanks to AI, that
Hmm.
things are going to so radically change in these next 4 years. I mean, this was Tristan Harris and some other dude giving a talk not too long ago, and I've heard that before. I also, yes, heard the conspiracies about this book that was written 100 years
Right.
ago called
The last
Trump, the
American.
Last President.
Yeah.
Baron von was it Baron von
Yeah.
some was it Baron von Trump?
I think it's Baron von Trump.
Baron von Trump and then the last president. And my mind went to like, could you fake that? Could you fake that these are actually old books, like they were written now to make them look
Ah.
like they were written back then, but now everyone thinks that they were written back then because I looked online and there's only modern things talking about that book now. There's nothing old talking about those books. So that's manufacturing conspiracy, knowing that there's a large growing
Whoa.
consensus of conspiracy theorists. Same thing as the Maui wildfires. How did a book about the Maui wildfires end up, and how climate change started it, end up on Amazon the day before
Hmm.
it happened? I looked at the published date. I'm like, happened the day before, and I'm like, I think there's some fuckery going on.
Yeah.
Like I don't know what it is. Um, but anyway, staying focused on the question: Can RFK, does he have a path to getting in the White House? I think he wants it personally. Will he get it? I'm not sure. Anything might change between now and then. I said earlier, in 6 years, I think government's going to drastically change, drastically evolve towards the next order. It did the last fourth turning, and that was the New Deal, Roosevelt's New Deal.
Right.
But I think it's bigger this time around, and I think it's
Hmm.
biblical this time around.
Hmm.
I think it marks an epoch in the changing of the world order. I think we may see it, even though it'll be invisible for a little bit. We may see global governance very, very shortly,
Hmm.
and maybe if we're lucky, it's not going to be some WF wet dream or WHO technocracy. It I think there's going to be elements of that. And I think there will be people like the RFKs, like the Ron Pauls, like even Vivek. If you listen to his podcast with Ezra Klein, very insightful about the actual nuance of where the different factions inside the Republican Party itself, where their ideology comes from, and why that's very important to understand. There's so
Hmm.
much more intelligence involved in this than most lay people understand. And so that's why I would just leave a lasting message to the audience that get inspired to look at viewpoints that you have historically felt annoyed by. Get inspired to listen to those viewpoints as if you know you are going to find something that resonates. And don't force it. Don't force yourself to resonate with shit that doesn't resonate, but don't dogmatically force every idea out. I listened to this. It's a podcast called Political Theory 101. The latest one on there was very, very brilliant. And it was a Marxist giving his case from a political theory, first principles and first values standpoint. And I'm like, that makes a lot of fucking sense. I don't agree. I'm not ready to jump ship yet. But when you hear it put unemotionally, without logical fallacy, driven straight from the political theory genesis of it, you're like, these aren't just retards running around there with like no like most people that got brainwashed by academia, fine. But where these ideas come from, even political race theory, go look at Political Theory 101, the last person who really shows you where some of these ideas came from, and you will understand why those ideas emerged because of the time period that they were in and what purpose they look to serve. By the way, the whole focus on identity politics and race and all that stuff was a push to, if we are going to have two public social spaces that are going to shape by and large the behavior of people in a collective sense, that's going to be in academia and in the corporations. So in academia and in the corporations, we want to do away with things that, yes, 60, 70 years ago were a big problem, like racism and trans or homophobia and things along those lines. Nowadays it's gotten pretty fucking kooky. But where it stemmed from was, we need people to not be blatantly racist, sexist, homophobic in the workplace and in academia, so we can focus on the points that will drive our species into the future. If you look at it and you want to understand where these ridiculous theories from the left come from, or the ridiculous theories on the right come from, you will find things that actually resonate. You have to do your own work to get there without dogmatically pushing it out.
Here, 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 here. I couldn't agree more. It's a gnosis. You have to go through it on your own. You have to experience it on your own. You have to have the energy to do that too, which is a thesis of this podcast, which is to take care of your body, to take care of your stress, to take care of your nutrition, your sleep, so that you have enough gas in the tank, then to go learn things for yourself and formulate your own opinions. And so, yeah,
I would
now's
love to hear you in the future put what you just said into collective terms. Needing more
mm,
sleep, needing to take care of the temple, right? Needing balance. I would love to hear your take, and we'll do this in the future, but in the collective sense of what humanity needs right now. Like, I
right.
think we all need magnesium, we're all deficient in it, but
Yes.
like, what is the correlate to the collective? I'd love to hear your take on that.
I've got lots of thoughts there.
Challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll put a pin in that. We'll circle back to it.
Great.
Ben, this was so great. Thank you. Now's a great time. Now's a great time to get curious about the world. So, thanks for joining me today on the Optimal Performance Podcast, dude.
Dude, thank you so much for having me.